Hi, this is Robin, and this is going to be part one in a series of videos comparing Photoshop and alternatives. This part one will be focused on the Photoshop workflow. So what I'm going to do is I will step through an image workflow from raw processing to retouching to compositing using Photoshop as a benchmark. And then in a series of videos, I will use the same image that I'm showing right here and try to follow the same workflow that I have used in Photoshop to see how it will work out using competing products to Photoshop one by one. So I will compare them on different capabilities, 4 steps, to help you decide which photo editing software might be right for you. Now, Photoshop is certainly powerful, but it is getting more and more expensive, and it is subscription only. So the intent of this series is to showcase the strengths and weaknesses of each of the programs that I'm going to showcase for basic raw image processing, selective retouching, and photo manipulation. So again, I'm only going to be comparing programs that compete directly with Photoshop. I'm not looking at Lightroom alternatives. So the things that this is and is not. So that's sort of what it is. The is not. This is not a review series. I'm not going into in-depth reviews on each of these products. And it's also not a set of tutorials about how to use Photoshop like I usually present, or its competitors. And I can't possibly showcase every feature in every program that I'm going to compare to Photoshop. So this is strictly about comparing photo processing workflows, both basic and pixel level, basic meaning raw conversions, to determine which alternative programs can handle the benchmarked steps, how easily or clunkily they handle them, or if they can't handle them. So I'm looking for myself, and I'm sharing my comparisons for you in case it will help you as things change price-wise over time here. Now, depending on the types of photo processing that you do and whether you're a professional who can expense software, there may be options that are more or less costly and more or less feature-rich, and possibly worth considering using for your own projects. So, things to keep in mind. If you don't need all the bells and whistles of Photoshop, some of the ones I'm going to compare in this series might be just as interesting and less costly for you. I've been using Photoshop for years. The alternative programs that I'm going to include in this series as comparisons to Photoshop are new to me. So I can provide some insights into the learning curves and how intuitive it is, at least to me, to start working with some of these competing programs. Now, what I will do is in the description below these videos, I'll include links to the other videos so that you can see the different comparisons and the different steps in the workflow and see how they compare. At the end of each video, what I will do is I'll put up a comparative capabilities chart that I will populate with symbols for what worked well, what worked easily or fast, what worked but maybe was a little less than elegant or a little clunky to work with, and then what just could not be handled at all. And again, so Photoshop will be the benchmark, and then those check marks will be relative to the benchmark. So let's get started with part one in this series, which is the Photoshop benchmark workflow. And I'm going to pause just for a moment here to be sure that I have all my settings cleared and ready to go. Hold on a sec. Okay, so I have this raw image open. So it's a stock photo and it's a Sony raw image, as you can see up here at the top of the interface. And I have opened this directly by opening it from Photoshop. Because it's a raw image, it has opened into Adobe Camera Raw. So this is the Adobe Camera Raw interface. It is comparable to and will look very much like Lightroom. So you can get a sense of, what you would, if you were working in Lightroom, what you could accomplish here also. So over on the right are the various settings panels. And as you can see here, I'm looking at this. I don't think this image needs straightening or cropping, but that would be one of the things that I would do first in this workflow. So let me just show you. I would go over here to the right, and if I wanted to straighten, I'd go to geometry and I'd click on this little A for automatic, and you can see it didn't need anything. But for your images, just if you're going to do a similar test, you might want to try this out and go to the geometry. And of course, you have all these capabilities here in Adobe Camera Raw to straighten vertically, horizontally. You can rotate, you can shift things to the right and left or up and down, you can scale. So there's a lot of feature richness in terms of what you can do. You can rotate and flip, etc. And there's even some generative expand here capabilities now in Adobe Camera Raw. So let me go back to the basics setting here, and let's just start working through. And again, I'm not showing you how to achieve a look here this time. We're looking at capabilities of the Photoshop program. So one of the things to keep in mind of what we're looking at here, and we'll look for in the competing programs when I do those videos next, is the breadth of settings and capabilities that you have for processing raw images. So let's just start in this light, or what used to be called the basics category here, and we see that we have exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So let's just start moving some of these, and again, these are not formulas. I'm just looking to see what we can do with these sliders. Compare a comparable workflow in another product going forward. Okay, and I'm not going to talk about my rationale like I usually would, because it's sort of irrelevant here. We're just looking to see what kind of alterations we can make and what capabilities there are. Right, I'll adjust the shadows, and you can see I don't feel compelled to go down from top to bottom. I usually go based on what I see in my image might be adjusting, and then if I need these areas here first, then I would do exposure and contrast last for this category. So I'm going to open up some of the shadows by pulling it to the right. Maybe add a little bit more richness because this is a hazy image. Okay, and again, usually when I'm doing this raw stuff, I'm just trying to get to a good base image versus doing all my processing here. Some people do all their processing in raw, so that's another option for you to consider, because there's certainly a lot of feature richness here. Just a hint of exposure. Right, and then I typically actually take the contrast down a little bit so we're not blowing things out, because the more you go up, the more you'll with contrast, you'll alter colors, and you will also make brighter areas brighter. So I'm just going to take that down a little bit. All right, that's good enough. All right, so then next I'm going to go to the effects category. And again, you don't have to feel compelled to use all of them or go in order. But because of the textures in this, I'm going to add some texture. Oops, I meant to use texture. Right, I just do a little bit at a time, and then I look and make sure I'm not over sharpening. All right, I'll stay there, and I am going to add a little, well, I guess it knew I wanted to get some clarity, so it went to where I think the clarity actually looks pretty good. I'm not going to use dehaze. This is a hazy image, so I want it to keep that hazy look, and I don't think I need to add more haze by pulling this left. For this particular image, I do not want to add any vignette or grain to start. So the next category we can look at is detail. So if I click on that caret, it will expand the detail. So I want to, because it's a stock image, I think I'm just going to click on denoise here for a raw denoise, but you also can do manual denoise. So there's different denoising capabilities here in Adobe Camera Raw. So let me just click on that, and then we'll just let Camera Raw do its thing. Okay, so that is finished, and I may not need to do too much, because the higher the denoise, the more you'll soften the image. So maybe I'll just pull that back a little bit, because it wasn't a super noisy image to start, but there we go. All right, and then you can also do sharpening in here. So again, I can just pull that sharpening slider to the right to add more sharpening. Again, I don't want to over sharpen to where I start seeing speckly white snow, as I call it, because that's not good, or you get edge halos, things like that. Those are clues you've over sharpened. I'm just looking at the plants here. Another thing you can do here in this as a feature functionality is under masking. If you press and hold the Alt or Option key and then click and start pulling, you can see the mask. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, you know masks, white shows, black hides. So this can show you where you are applying the sharpening and how much of the edges you're applying sharpening to if you want to. So that's something else you can try working with. Okay, so that is it for detail area. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time making this a perfect image. The point is to focus on capabilities. So under color, let's open that up a little bit. And again, you'll see you have the option to keep all these panels open or settings categories open, or you can do what I've done and just keep the ones open that you use all the time and then open and close, or have open and stay open others. All right, so under the color category, if you need to, you can adjust white balance. You can have a variety of capabilities. There's all the different ones there. You can try auto. You can use this little eyedropper and click on a neutral color. So I'm just going to look for a neutral gray or something here. Oops, wrong thing. And see if I can get it to adjust. And depending on where you click, it will do different things. Okay. And then that's compared to just clicking on auto and seeing what it does. So you can see that made it very magenta, which I don't really care for. Or else you can sample. I like that better. It's a little bit cooler. Okay, so then also you can adjust the color temperature. So if you wanted to make this a little warmer, you could pull it to the right. You can adjust the vibrance. So maybe I'll give this a little bit of a pop with vibrance. It may have gotten a little crazy. I typically use vibrance rather than saturation. Saturation is another instance, just like contrast, that can really alter and overdo colors. So typically, if I pull vibrance up, I pull saturation down. So we just know we have both the choice of vibrance and saturation here in Adobe Camera Raw. Yeah, that took it down so you didn't get neon greens and stuff. Okay, you can adjust the color temperature, as I said. So right now you can see it's on 56 basically Kelvin. So if I want to warm it up, I can pull it to the right. You leave that there. And then same thing with the tint. If it's gotten a little bit too green, you can pull it towards the magenta to offset. So these are, again, capabilities to keep in mind that you have this feature richness if you're looking at alternatives. Okay, let me close that. Just to point out, even though I'm not going to use them, you have tone curves, and you have color grading capabilities, and you have all sorts. It's a lot of feature richness here, as well as all sorts of presets, okay, and masking and things like that. So I'm not going to use them all for this image, but just be aware there are a lot of features that you can use here. So this was what I will consider the first step, which is a basic global raw workflow. And some of you, this might be all you need to be aware of, okay, and all you might want to use. So it's something to keep in mind with if you're paying for Photoshop, and when we look at the competitors, whether you really need to pay for all of Photoshop to get comparable capabilities. So once you get your settings the way you like, in Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw, you'd click open, wait for it to open, okay? Expand this. Yep, mouse, sometimes it's a little bit temperamental. Okay, so now I have that raw image processed as step 1 in the basic raw workflow. So now we are in the Photoshop interface. And so we have a layers panel here. We have properties that show here. I always duplicate my background layer before I work on it. You can either click it and drag it to the Add New Layer icon, or do a Control or Command J to jump up a duplicate copy. But I highly recommend that you work on duplicates and not the base layer. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Hold on a minute. Okay, so now from a comparison of capabilities standpoint, I'm going to move to step 2, which I'll classify as retouching and generatively filling selected areas of an image. So again, this is in second capabilities category. I will be comparing to alternatives to Photoshop. So when I look at this image, I see distractions down here. So that's one of the first things I want to take care of here in Photoshop as a benchmark, is how well or how easily we can get rid of distractions. So I am going to add an empty layer because then it can be masked if I want to. I'm going to use Photoshop's remove tool. And again, my remove tool is that little white circle. The green is just my highlighter for you to see it. Okay, and then I'll just draw over the distractions and then wait for Photoshop to process. You can see it already processed that. See the processing. Okay, and there's some more. I'm only going to do this in small areas so it doesn't get super blurred, but again, I'm not going to, and if you'll notice here, if I draw around an area, it auto-fills for me, so that saves time. That's a convenient feature in Photoshop. So we'll see if the alternative remove tools, or if they have comparable remove tools, if they work the same way. I'm gonna leave some of this because it's reflecting from that. I don't like all little, this might be a fish, but I don't like it. It's bright and it catches attention. Okay. Let me get rid of some of this over here. And some of this I wouldn't necessarily do, but in real, quote unquote, real life, but I want you to see how quickly the remove function works and how effective it is. All right, so let's just say that's enough removing of the foreground distractions. So this, let me just label this so we know what we did here when we look at it. Okay, so foreground distractions removed. So let me add another empty layer. So those were relatively small distractions that were in the image. You saw that they could work pretty fast, and it certainly seemed to fill in, at least to my eye, pretty well on there. Let's try getting rid of this rock and its reflection as something, because if you're going to do compositing, you might want to get rid of something and composite something else in. So let's see how well Photoshop's remove tool works removing something larger. And again, I'll just trace around and make sure that I'm capturing some of what's outside of the thing I'm removing so that Photoshop knows what to use for reference. Again, it's processing up at the top here. I think it did a pretty good job, and it certainly did it quickly. You can always do some extra little touch-ups if you want. Okay, so that was remove rock. So that's a fairly large area, and I think it did a pretty good job matching to that area. All right, so let me add a stamp layer, which is essentially a merge of all the prior layers without flattening them, to continue on. Okay, so now we have a composite, so essentially it's functioning like a brand new base layer there too. So now what I want to try to do as a function in Photoshop is to make this image larger. because again, I want to see what features competing products have. So here we have the image. What I want to do is I want to add, in case I want to composite something into this area here, I want to make the bottom of the image a little broader and retain what's going on in the image. And because this part of the roof was chopped off in this shot, I want to push this out to the side and hopefully see if this will regenerate and get the edge of the roof line just like that, and also fill in all these intricate trees, shrubs, rocks, etc. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use Photoshop's crop tool right there, and you'll get those lines around the outside. I'm going to click on that handle in the center and just pull it down a little bit. I don't need to add too much at the bottom. And then I'm going to grab this handle on the left and I'm going to pull it left enough that I hope it will have space to finish out that roof line. Now I have to look up here in the options bar for Photoshop because it has so many options, you have to be sure you're choosing the right thing. So right now it's on transparent pixels by default. And you can see those are transparent, those little gray boxes. That means there's no content there. If I click this down arrow, I have other options I can use with expanding the canvas. I can use a generative expand, or I can use a content aware fill. Now in Photoshop, the content aware fill, you will not be debited credits. So they won't take away credits from your monthly allocation if you use content aware fill. So I would say if you weren't doing this side and you were just doing something like the water or a solid, kind of a color area, definitely use content aware fill, because that will be very easy, fast, and you won't get charged credits. Because I have tricky areas to match, I'm going to use generative expand. Okay, and then I will click the check mark and hopefully we'll see what Photoshop will do. So it is generating content to fill these empty areas. Okay, and because I used a generative expand that debits credits, you are in your properties panel here on the right side of my interface given 3 variations that you can check to see which one you like the best. So we can just look and see in the areas that were expanded what we like. So yes, it did what I wanted it to do, and it finished out the roof line versus chopping it off. Here's variation 2. It's also good, but I don't care for that. This is drawing attention down here. Okay, and then this also is very good. It added more rocks here, but it opened up. So let me this one, number 2, I know I don't want because this is a distraction to me. So what I typically do is you can delete the ones you don't want so that they don't take up more memory space on your computer. I really like that one, I think. Yeah, I prefer that one. So I'm going to get rid of this one here. If you don't find one that's just what you want, they also give you, if you check on these little 3 dots here, to generate similar ones to one you like, but I'm not going to take the time to do that here. So I will work with this variant, okay? All right, so we did the generative expand, and now what I want to do here is I want to, for this second step, I want to group the step 2 items. So I'm going to click on this, hold the shift key, come down to here, and I'm going to come down and make a group out of this. So it just keeps it neater. And so what we're going to say is this was all representing step 2 of capabilities in Photoshop, which was our retouching and gen billing capabilities. Okay. All right, and these 2 layers here, let me just label it, represented step 1, which was a raw processing. Okay, and that was ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. Okay, so now we've completed two different kinds of steps or capabilities that are available in Photoshop. We have the raw processing, and we saw that it's fairly easily, and there's quite a number of feature capabilities, and it's quite fast in step 2, which was the retouching and generative filling part of someone's workflow. So now another typical workflow step that somebody might do is compositing and matching. And again, that doesn't mean you need to do all of these steps. You just are going to watch for the capabilities in the workflow steps that are of interest to you. So I'm going to add another stamp layer here. Okay, so now, again, I'm going to take a drink of water here. For some reason, my throat's going. Okay, so now we will go on to step 3 in the workflow, which will be compositing and matching. So what I want to do is replace this rock that I took out of here with a Japanese stone lantern. Okay, so what I'm going to do is work with, and let me get off of my neutral tool. I always put it back on the lasso tool. So I have another stock photo over here waiting and ready to go. You might have another photo of yours. And sorry, I'm just going to have to pause for a moment here because my throat is really going. Okay, we're back. So I have this stock photo of a stone lantern available here that I've opened, and it is a stock photo from Adobe Stock. And I want to move just this lantern into this scene. Now, when we look at this, we can see that this is a very blue photo, and this is much more of a green photo. So it's going to be important not only to get this component into this as a composited in element, it will also be important to know whether we can match the color of this to the scene so it doesn't look like some strange thing that was just cut out and pasted in. So what I'm going to go do is go to this image here and activate it so you can see it's active here. I'm going to do a Control or Command J to make a copy of that. So that's the copy. Okay, and now with that copy layer active, I'm going to go to the Properties panel right here, and I'm going to just click this button that says Remove Background, so I don't have to do selecting or anything. I want to see how Photoshop handles getting rid of this background for me. Click the button and wait. Okay, you can see it has identified and selected that lantern. Let me turn this off so we can see what's there, and isolated it on an empty layer that can be moved into this image here. Now let me just move this over, make this a little bigger so we can see what we're looking at here. Now, what you can see, or maybe can't see so well on the video, is that it looks like it might not have totally identified everything that needed to be removed. So what I can do is you can work on the mask, and that's one of the benefits of creating a mask, and you can paint with black to hide anything that wasn't selected. So we've got that on black. We've got the brush tool. This a little bit bigger, and again, I'm not going to worry about being perfect if I go over an edge or something. The point is not to create a perfect image. I'm trying to look at capabilities. So you can easily in one click remove a background in Photoshop, and you can doctor or fix anything that isn't selected properly on a mask with a brush tool. So that's a good capability to be able to have that and to save time. All right, so now I'm going to move this back over to the side. So now we want to get this into here. So all you'd have to do is click on the Move tool in the toolbar in Photoshop, click on your object that you want to composite in and drag it into or over your image, and it puts it in there. So let me put this back over here. Okay, and you can see it's super large, so that's not so great the way that is. So we need to be able to make this more of a decent size. So I will convert this first of all to a smart object. Okay, and now I can make this smaller with an edit, transform, scale. So we can easily make this smaller to suit the image. And again, if I was doing something for me, I might take the time and try to put this in the water, but I'm not going to have you watch me fooling around with that when there are certainly tools to, brush away and mask and make it look like it's in the water. I'm just going to line it up with the bottom for now and widen this out a little bit. Move this over here a little bit. Okay, and so now we've easily gotten this resized using transform scale capabilities here in Photoshop. But what did I say before? This came from a blue image. You can see how blue it is relative to this. So the question is, can we color match this to the rest of the scene? So with that lantern layer active, let's go to Filter, Neural Filters, and come down to the color harmonization. So you can see there's all kinds of different capabilities here, but let's just see how well this harmonization will harmonize or match this object to the rest of the scene. What you have to do in harmonization is you have to give Photoshop a heads up as to what to compare the colors to. So you click on the layer you want it to use as a reference. You probably saw it processed at the bottom, and now it has done its take on the harmonization. So if I turn that off, you can see that's what it was pulled in. This is what Photoshop has done as a recommended harmonization. Now you can see you also, in harmonizing or color matching, have all the feature functionality of these different tools. Okay, so you can reduce the strength if you think it was too much. There's a lot of green in this image, so you may want to just customize it and add some more green to what's being put into that. There's a lot of yellow. Yellows and greens go together in Photoshop, so you might want to give it a little hit of yellow there too. You may want to give it just a hint of saturation. Even though it's in some bright light here, you don't want this to pull all the attention from this. You may want to darken the brightness a bit. So again, a lot of ability to customize. And if you're not happy, you can always tell Photoshop people, the Adobe people, what you think. And then you can choose how you want to output it. So that's nice to have choices too. I'm going to output it as a smart filter since I brought it in as a smart object, and I just click OK to go back to Photoshop. Okay, so now we're back there. So we have composited in an element, and we have color matched it. So I think that was pretty simple and straightforward, and a lot of it was handled by Photoshop for me. So once you kind of learn the features and that the features are there, I think it's pretty straightforward to use them. And if you do a lot of compositing, then this is a really good functionality to have to save you time and help you achieve things that would have been a lot clunkier or taken a lot longer. Certainly would be doable to color match and do things manually, but this is pretty fast. Okay, so again, think for yourself. What do you do on a regular basis? All right, so again, I'm going to make a copy of this, through this, turn it into a group. So our step 3 features and capabilities analysis for this Photoshop benchmark was the compositing and matching to the scene. Okay, so far we've gone through 3 steps here: raw processing, basic retouching, and generative filling. And again, you can be doing a lot more, but you need to just see that how it handles it generally with a basic workflow. And here's compositing and matching. So the last workflow category that I want to show, and again, not everybody will want to use this, but for those who do, I think it's important for you to see that it works and how it works in Photoshop as well as in alternatives that I'm going to compare Photoshop to in future videos. So the last thing is sky replacement. Granted, this is kind of a hazy thing and the sky matches, but let's see if we can just add a more interesting sky. And of course, an important thing to think about if you're going to do sky replacement is it's critical to pick the right sky for the right image. Okay, so I have added another stamp layer here, and now let's try sky replacement. So we're going to go to Edit, Sky Replacement. So there is a full functionality called Sky Replacement and a full interface for sky replacement in Photoshop. And it brings up this dialog box. And what it does is it populates your image with the last used sky. So just to show you here, you can have a library of skies in Photoshop. It comes automatically with some, but you can add your own. Okay, so quite a few of these are ones I've added or gotten from the web or from other people who've shared them. Okay, so you see what your sky is that you're using, and I think this cloudy sky works well but with this scene, but it adds a little bit more interest than that just pure gray. You have all sorts of tools. You can move it around or mask or zoom in or whatever in this interface. You can deal with the sky itself in this area of the interface. So let's just see what happens. We can shift the edge. And I watch the edges to see what's happening. Okay, let me leave that there. You can fade the edge relative to what's butting up against it. Right, let me leave that there. You can adjust the brightness, temperature, and scale of the skies. So I'm going to make this a little brighter for this scene. Let me go to an even number. It'll be easier to remember. Go. Again, a lot of warmth in this scene, so I will add a little bit of warmth to the sky. Okay, the scale. So this is the basic sky. Typically, I don't scale it down because then the edges of the sky start coming in. So it depends, I guess, on the resolution of the sky you're using. But I'm going to try to scale it up so you don't see quite as much going on with all the detail that's going on in the landscape here. So again, you can have the capability to adjust all these things. Yes, I think that's a little better. So you get the sense of a little bit more interest than that just pure gray sky that was there in the original image. You also can flip it. So let's say you end up with a bunch of clouds here and you don't want them here because they're distracting from whatever's going on in this part of the image. You can flip it horizontal so that it ends up over on the other side. So that's a nice functionality to be able to have. And then you can match what's going on in the foreground to what's happening in the sky. So again, they don't look disconnected. So let me just hit a little bit of the foreground lighting just to make some adjustment. Okay, and again, the edge lighting relative to the sky. And there's no formulas. I just go back and forth till I see something that looks like I want. And then the color adjustment, I'm going to leave this pretty much in the middle for this image, but just get it there and then I'll talk. If you're putting a sunset into a scene or something like that, and there's oranges or reds or whatever, well, then you certainly want to have some of that color reflect into the landscape that you're putting that sky into. So that's what this would do. It would help pull some of the colors from the sky down into your foreground so that it doesn't look totally alien. Now, before I leave this, and again, you have a choice of new layers or duplicate layer, and for this, what we're doing here, I like new layers because then you get all the masks that you can work with, etc. So that's something to keep in mind relative to competitors too, is do you have all this functionality that you have here in Photoshop in the competing products that I'm going to compare it to? Okay, so one thing to mention is when you're working with scenes like this, what do you see? There is a big area of reflection. It does not look right if you do not match your sky to reflected areas in the scene, whether it's a body of water like this, whether it's a puddle on a rainy day, whether it's a chrome on a car, anything that's a reflective surface. You should match your sky to whatever is reflective in the scene. So it's not the easiest thing to do in Photoshop, but it is possible to create that reflection. So what you would need to do it in Photoshop is keep track of all this. So I moved all these sliders, and keep track, write down all these settings, because in order to match that sky so it looks right in the reflection when you do it, you're going to have to keep track of those settings and re-enter them, because when you launch sky replacement, all the settings go back to a default. Okay, it will keep the sky sticky, meaning it will remember it, but it will set all these sliders back to their defaults. So once you're ready, click OK. And you can see that what you get from Photoshop with sky replacement is things where you can adjust the brightness, you can adjust the balance, you can modify the masks. You have a lot of capability, even once it's done its automated things, to make adjustments to suit what you want to do. So I'm going to click that caret and turn that sideways, and I'm going to label this. This is the sky of the sky replacement group. Okay. All right. So now what I want to do is, again, add a stamp layer. And for those of you who haven't seen my other videos, the stamp layer, I usually add a transparent layer first, which is what that box with the plus is, and then do a Shift, Control, or Command, Alt, or Option, and E all at the same time to get that stamp layer. Okay. And then what that is going to be is that's going to become the water reflection. Okay. So with that stamp layer, now what I want to do is flip this image upside down so that we fake Photoshop into thinking that this is the sky. So we're going to do Edit, Transform, Flip Vertical. Okay, and it's upside down. So now what we are hoping Photoshop will do, let me move this over here a little bit more, is see this as a sky and populate it with that same kind of sky. So let's go to Edit, Sky Replacement, and see, you can see Photoshop's thinking, and it has put that same sky. So it does keep the same sky. But as I told you, it has reset all the settings back to the defaults. It would be nice if it sort of retained them, or if there was something in here that you could click right next, have another little click box that says create reflection. Okay, at least I would prefer that. So now I have to re-enter those settings that I just used to adjust the sky again. So I believe I had 50. That's why I like to sort of use even numbers here when I'm doing demos. Okay, oops, 50. Fade edge, I believe I had 44. I didn't normally I'd do 45, but right. And then the brightness. Now, the brightness, I am not going to do the same thing as I did here, because this is down and surrounded by shadow. And even though this is an area of light, I want my brightness to be darker here. So I'm going to take this brightness darker than I used for the sky. That's my logic there. And again, whether you can do all of this stuff in competing products is what we're going to try to find out when we do a similar, or attempt to do a similar workflow in the other products. Okay, so the temperature I do want to keep the same, which I believe was 12. The scale I want to mimic, otherwise it'll look like there's a different sky. All right, I think that's where that was. And I am not, because we don't want to affect the sky this time, going to make any adjustments to the foreground. So I will, again, keep it at New Layers for the output and click OK. And again, it generated all these sky replacement layers. So I'm going to label this one as the reflection. close that up so that it keeps it more. Okay, so now I'm going to do another stamp layer. And now what I'll have to do is to turn this right side up. So edit, transform, flip vertical again, so we get the image right side up. So now I can pull this in a little bit, and I think I'll just close this out so we don't have that lurking in the background. Okay, so now we've got our right side up image. Make it bigger. Okay, so now what we want to do, I'm going to duplicate this layer. And so now I want to get a little trickier again. And again, this goes to people who are doing compositing. So certainly this kind of a workflow step would be very optional. But if you do compositing and if you do things like putting skies in, I just want to show you these features in Photoshop, and then we'll see if we can do them in competing products too. So now what I want to do is match the ripples and how the water is appearing here so that it's not just a flat sky laid into here. And if you have a sky with even more texture, this could become even more important. So using Photoshop, what I would do is probably work with the selection brush tool from the toolbar. And you can see the selection brush is that black circle. And I'm just going to select this area that we just reflected sky into. And again, the disclaimer that I'm not going to worry about selecting too cleanly here for purposes of just checking out capabilities. Right. So the blue overlay is the area that's being selected. And then I also have to do this area over here. And you see, again, it'll fill in if you close the selection. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to create a layer mask for the selection. So let me get off of that tool here. So you can see we have the marching ants selection that was created with that tool. I'm going to add a layer mask to that layer that shows where we have that selection. Because I had it on lowered opacity, that's why it's doing what it's doing there. I want to feather that mask so that anything I do to this is sort of a gradual transition. So with the mask active, I can feather and get a gradual transition to the rest of the scene. So that's something that's good to know that we can do in Photoshop. Okay, so now I want to create this to change this to a smart object. All right, there we go. So now what I want to do, so this is the sky reflection only. Okay, and that's what's on that layer. All right, so now what I want to do is add some blur here, just so if it looks like the water is, the breeze is hitting it and it's moving. So let's see, we filter, blur, motion blur. So there is a capability to do that in Photoshop. And what you can do is match the angle, this widget, or typing in a number, so you would be able to just move it. And so when I look at this, I see this angle here. So that's what I'm looking at for the angle to try to match. Let me just do that. That looks pretty close. And then you can also say how much blur or how little blur that you want. So that's good that we have flexibility to be able to adjust the amount of blur. So that's a good functionality to have here in Photoshop. So, all right, so I've added some blur here to the scene. So I'll click OK. So that's great to know that we can do that. So now the next thing I want to do is sort of do what we did with this lantern here. Let me pull this down so that I can see the whole scene. So I had to color match this to this scene. So I want to be sure that the sky that I've dropped into the surrounding green area is matching. So let's see, can we color match that sky reflection to the surrounding water like we did with the lantern? So I want to control or command well, let me first make the selection active again. So I'll hit Control or Command and click on this and make that active. And then we'll do a Control or Command J and get that up on its own layer. And now let's see, we'll see if it will let us harmonize that again like we did before using neural filters. Opened at least. And then color harmonization, click that. And again, you have to select the layer that to tell Photoshop what to harmonize with. So we're going to give it the full layer so it sees the colors. It's processing down here. And so again, let's see if it did. Yeah, it did it slightly. All right, and again, this time I'm not going to, well, maybe I will add just something here. Let me see. So maybe I'll add a little bit more green to it. Not too much. Just to give it that sense, and a little bit more yellow, because often when you have greens, you want to adjust in Photoshop, you adjust the yellows. Just give it a hint of saturation. Let's just see if we take the brightness down. Yeah, I like that better because, again, I want the attention in here. So when you're making composites or anything, think about where the attention's going to go, and it will go to bright things. All right, so a lot of flexibility to adjust a sky reflection to its surroundings too. So let me go to a new layer, output it to a new layer, click OK. Wait. All right, so this is the harmonized sky reflection. Oops. Okay. All right, so now let me do the same thing I did with these other groups down here. So this, I'll make sure that top layer is highlighted. I'll press the Shift key, and I'll go all the way down to here, hit Group, and that was step 4 in the workflow, which was add new sky plus reflection. Okay, so using Photoshop as a benchmark, starting with a raw image, and we worked through a raw processing workflow and saw all the breadth of tools and features and capabilities that were available there. And then for those who want to work in a workflow that goes beyond raw processing, there certainly were tools to do retouching, getting rid of little flaws and distractions, getting rid of objects and generatively filling areas. We were able to composite in external elements into the scene and match them to the scene. And there was a lot of automated tools and capabilities and features to do that. And it worked relatively quickly. Now, I can't speak for if it will be a little slower depending on the processor that you're using on your computer. But to me, it was pretty quick for what it would do versus working manually to achieve those same things. And then the final step that I did in my test workflow is adding a new sky and a reflection from the sky to a reflective surface in the landscape. So again, this is the image I'm going to use to try using alternatives to Photoshop. And these are the kinds of steps I'm going to try to follow to see if there are similar capabilities and functionalities, and if they are as easy to use, a little bit more clunky or kludgy to use, or if they don't exist in competing products, okay, to Photoshop. So let's just, maybe look here and see how we started, which was here. So this was the original image, and because I scaled it larger, that's why you're seeing the transparency. So where you're seeing the content, that was the original image. And then this is what we've gotten to after these 4 workflow steps, okay? So actually, the first step represented what we did coming in from Adobe Camera Raw, but you know what I mean. So that is, again, what I wanted to do here was to showcase a spectrum of Photoshop raw processing and photo manipulation capabilities to benchmark whether Photoshop alternative post-processing products are comparable, or if you need to be spending what you're spending for Photoshop to get the capabilities that you will need. Okay, so let me just pause this for a moment, because at the end of each of these comparison videos, what I'm going to do is pull up a capabilities comparison chart, and I'll put symbols in it to say which products were able to handle which things and how well. So hold on while I grab that chart. Okay, so this is the chart I told you. So this is the editing capabilities matrix that I have set up that I'm going to be used to compare Photoshop as the benchmark, which we went through in this video, versus alternative products. And so for each of them, I will be trying to, first of all, use that same raw image that we just looked at with the Japanese garden. And then we'll be looking at comparing the functionality for raw basics and processing, for retouching capabilities, for compositing, and for sky replacement. And then that hopefully will help you at least decide whether you want to look at some of these other competing products: Affinity Photo 2, Photopia, GIMP, ACDC Gemini 15, and at minimum, maybe do some free trials and see if what might be suitable for you. Now, as I go through each of these videos on each of these competing products, I'll do something like I did here, and I will fill in the symbols. So we just did Photoshop as the benchmark. So a green check to me means it handles the capability, is pretty comprehensive, and is either quasi or completely automated in terms of how it will help you handle the capabilities. So I'm definitely giving a green check to Camera Raw Basics for Camera Raw processing. We don't see it here yet. It may show up in some of the others as I go through them. I haven't worked through them yet to see. I am new, as I mentioned, to these products, so we'll see, how it works for me as somebody coming from Photoshop to adjust to them. But if they need it, I will include an amber yield kind of a symbol in some of these other boxes to say the capability is partially supported, but it may be clunkier, or there may be more manual steps to achieve it than it would be to do that same functionality in Photoshop. And then if I end up putting a red X in any of these other boxes, that will mean that the capability is not there yet and you can't do something that you can do in Photoshop. And then I'll just do a quick little summary assessment. As I said, this is not intended to be an in-depth review. This is just what are some workflow things to think about and to entice you to decide what works for you. So again, if you only need or use basic raw processing, I suspect that these alternative apps that I'm going to test drive next and do a shootout with compared to Photoshop might work perfectly fine for you without using the pricey ongoing subscription that Adobe demands. So that's why, let's get exposed to it and see what's what. But we'll find out as I go through these in my next videos. I'm expecting that the real trade-off analysis and decisions to be made whether to stick with Photoshop or go with an alternative will be made in these other workflow categories: the retouching, compositing, and sky replacement. And if you do a lot of work in those areas, then that's where the decisions may come and be most critical. Your preference will depend on the type of photo processing that you do and how often you need these categories of features. So I'm not going to mention anything about pricing in any of this because that would become outdated fast. I will note in some of these notes here if a program is a subscription or a one-time purchase model. So I think that's important for some people too. So I'd say that's it for this part 1 Photoshop benchmark video. So next up, what I'm going to do is I will attempt a similar workflow to what I just went through here in Photoshop, using the same raw image and starting with the competitor Affinity Photo 2. By the way, I think I should just mention, for the disclaimers here, I am not affiliated with or compensated by any of these companies. I'm just a user who's trying to determine whether Photoshop or alternative options will work well for my needs, especially with changing prices that are going up considerably in plans from Adobe. My channel is Photoshop oriented, so I've been working with it for years. That's what I am familiar with. So I'm sort of doing some investigating for myself and sharing it with you. So take care. I hope this will be helpful, and stay tuned for how this workflow works for me when I try to show you how it works going through Affinity Photo 2, which I don't use. So I'll be learning and showing you my learning curve as well.